My wife declared independence overnight. I reclaimed our home, set boundaries, exposed her rules, and forced a reckoning that rebuilt our marriage finally. That evening, the hum of the television was in the background, and the faint aroma of dinner still lingered in the air. But as we sat in the living room, something was clearly off. She wasn't looking at me, she was staring past me, her arms crossed tightly, her jaw set in that way I knew meant trouble. "You know," she finally said, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about me." Her voice was calm but laced with an edge that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "I've decided I'm going to live my life the way I want. No more asking for permission, no more rules. I'm done with that." I blinked, taken aback. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, keeping my tone even though my chest was tightening. "It means I'm done with the compromises," she said, looking me straight in the eyes now. "If I want to go out, I'll go out. If I want to spend money on something, I will. I don't need your input on everything I do. I'm an adult and I'll live my life however I see fit." Her words hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, with a finality that made it clear she wasn't interested in discussing it further. For a moment, I was stunned. This wasn't the woman I married, at least not the version of her I thought I knew. "So, that's it," I said, my voice rising slightly despite my attempt to stay calm. "You're just going to do whatever you want, and I'm supposed to—" "What? Just live with it?" She shrugged. "I'm not asking for permission, and I'm not looking for a fight. I just wanted to be upfront with you." Upfront? This felt more like a bombshell than a confession. My mind raced. What had brought this on? Was this about something I'd done, or not done? I thought back to our recent conversations, searching for any hint of this storm brewing. But I came up blank. "What about us?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What about this marriage?" She sighed, her tone softening slightly. "This isn't about you, okay? It's about me. I've been feeling trapped, like I've been living my life for everyone else. I need to find myself again." "Find yourself," I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "In a marriage, we're supposed to find ourselves together. That's the whole point." She shook her head as though I was missing something obvious. "You don't get it. This isn't about you. It's about me, and I'm not going to keep justifying it." At that moment, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not yet, but a deep simmering frustration. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The life we'd built together, the house we'd turned into a home, the partnership we'd promised each other. All of it suddenly felt like it was being ripped apart by her words. But I didn't let my voice rise. I didn't lash out. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing, my stomach churning. I realized this was no passing whim. She was serious, dead serious. The conversation ended abruptly after that. She got up and walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there in silence. I could hear her footsteps on the stairs, her bedroom door clicking shut behind her. And me? I stayed there, staring at the spot where she'd been sitting, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. I wasn't just upset. I was blindsided. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. This wasn't the marriage I signed up for. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point. A moment where everything we'd built together was suddenly in question. But if she thought she could unilaterally decide how things were going to be in my house, she had another thing coming. That night, after she went upstairs and shut the door, I stayed in the living room for hours. The silence of the house felt oppressive, almost mocking. My thoughts raced in a chaotic loop. Was this a phase? Was I overreacting? But as I replayed her words in my mind, the message was clear. She wasn't backing down. And if I didn't act, this was how things were going to be from now on. I wasn't about to let that happen. The next morning, I kept things calm. She came downstairs, dressed for the day, acting as though the bomb she dropped the night before hadn't happened. I greeted her, made coffee, and sat across from her at the table. We exchanged a few polite words about work schedules and errands, but beneath the surface, my mind was already working. I couldn't confront her again, not yet. She'd made it clear she wasn't interested in a conversation, so I decided to shift my focus, not on her, but on what I could control. If she was determined to live her life however she wanted, she'd need to learn that every action had a consequence. That week, I began making changes, subtle ones at first. For starters, I reviewed the household expenses. We'd always been transparent about finances, but I decided it was time to tighten things up. I adjusted our shared budget, limiting discretionary spending. I didn't tell her right away. I wanted her to feel it, to understand that if she was going to act independently, she'd need to take on the full weight of those choices. Next, I restructured my own routines. I'd always been the one to accommodate her schedule, rearranging plans to suit her whims. Not anymore. I started going to the gym after work, staying late at the office, or making plans with friends without consulting her. If she wanted freedom, I'd show her what that looked like from my side. Then came the household responsibilities. She'd always had a knack for ignoring chores she didn't like, assuming I'd pick up the slack. This time, I let the dishes pile up. I stopped folding her laundry or stocking the pantry with her favorite snacks. When she finally noticed and asked, "Why didn't you take care of this?" I simply said, "I thought we were living our own lives now." Her reaction was predictable: annoyance, followed by silence. I could see the wheels turning in her mind. She wasn't used to this version of me, the one who wasn't bending over backward to keep the peace. And while she didn't say it out loud, the shift in her demeanor told me she was starting to realize this new reality wasn't as simple as she thought. One evening, about a week after her declaration, she walked into the living room where I was reading. She stood there for a moment, as though deciding whether to speak. Finally, she said, "You've been different lately." I looked up from my book and met her gaze. "I'm just following your lead," I replied evenly. "Living my life the way I want." She frowned, clearly frustrated. "That's not what I meant." "Then explain it to me," I said, setting the book down. "Because from where I'm standing, you set the rules. I'm just playing by them." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she crossed her arms and looked away, as if searching for the right words. But there weren't any, and she knew it. This wasn't the argument she wanted to have. Not yet. After a moment, she muttered something under her breath and left the room. That was the first time I felt like I'd regained a sliver of control. It wasn't much, but it was enough to reinforce my resolve. I wasn't trying to win a power struggle. I just wanted to remind her that this house, this marriage, wasn't a solo endeavor. If she wanted to rewrite the rules, I'd make sure she felt the weight of her choices. Still, I knew this was only the beginning. She wasn't the type to back down easily, and neither was I. The lines had been drawn, and neither of us was willing to cross them just yet. But one thing was certain: the balance of power had shifted, and we were both starting to feel it. The silence between us grew heavier as the days turned into weeks. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes with comfort or routine. It was charged, almost suffocating. Neither of us wanted to be the first to break. I went about my life as if her declaration hadn't rattled me to the core, and she did the same, though her frustration was starting to show. Her little jabs came first. Comments slipped in casually but laced with venom. "I guess you're too busy to even notice what's going on around here," she'd say when I walked past the overflowing trash can. Or, "Didn't think you'd be this petty," when she noticed the grocery list had mysteriously shrunk to just essentials. I didn't take the bait. Not directly. Instead, I leaned further into my strategy, escalating in small, calculated ways. One night, for instance, I decided to rearrange the living room, our living room, as she'd always liked to call it. I swapped the couch and the armchair, moved her favorite throw blanket to a shelf, and even took down one of the framed pictures she'd insisted on hanging above the fireplace. When she walked in and saw the changes, her face said everything. She paused, scanned the room, and then fixed her eyes on me. "What the hell is this?" "I thought I'd make it more functional," I replied without looking up from my phone. "You know, since I'm living my life the way I want." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't say anything more. She just turned around and went upstairs. I knew she was angry, but I also knew she wouldn't confront me outright. That wasn't her style. She preferred subtle digs and passive resistance, and I was ready for both. She retaliated in ways that might seem trivial to someone else but were calculated to irritate me. She'd leave the kitchen a mess after making dinner, knowing it would get under my skin. She started watching TV shows she knew I hated, turning the volume up just enough to make it hard for me to ignore. And then there were the late nights. She started going out more, coming home just late enough to make a point, but not so late that I could call her out on it. It was exhausting, this unspoken war we were waging. Every small victory felt hollow because I knew it came at the expense of something bigger. But I couldn't back down. If I gave an inch, she'd take a mile. That much was clear. The tension reached a boiling point one Friday night. She came home later than usual, her heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floor as she walked in. She dropped her bag on the table, ignoring me as I sat in the living room. I watched her for a moment, then said, "You could at least text when you're going to be this late." She turned to face me, her expression a mix of defiance and fatigue. Text you? Why? So you can keep tabs on me. I told you I'm living my life. And this is how you define that? I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. Coming home at all hours, making a mess of everything, acting like none of this matters? Her laugh was cold. Oh, it matters, all right. It matters that you can't stand not being in control. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You can't handle the idea of me not checking with you before I do something. The words hit harder than I expected, but I didn't let it show. This isn't about control, I said, keeping my tone even. It's about respect, for this house, for this relationship. You think you're proving something by acting like a teenager? Fine. But don't expect me to just sit here and let you walk all over me. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. For a brief moment, the air between us was thick with everything we wanted to say but couldn't. Then she shook her head, grabbed her bag, and stormed upstairs. I stayed where I was, staring at the empty staircase. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a battlefield. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure if either of us would come out of it unscathed. For days, we barely spoke a word to each other. We moved through the house like strangers, our once shared life reduced to a series of avoided glances and closed doors. But beneath the quiet, something was building. I could feel it. This standoff couldn't last forever. It came to a head one evening when I came home to find her sitting in the kitchen. She wasn't scrolling on her phone or pretending to ignore me like usual. She was just sitting there, waiting. I walked in, dropped my keys on the counter, and braced myself. "We need to talk," she said, her tone sharp but controlled. I sat across from her, folding my arms. "All right, let's talk." She took a deep breath, as if preparing for battle. "This isn't working," she said. Whatever it is we've been doing, it's toxic and it's tearing us apart." I leaned back in my chair, my eyes fixed on her. "Funny. That's exactly what I was thinking when you decided to throw out the rule book and live your life however you wanted without any regard for me or this marriage." Her jaw tightened. "Don't twist this around. You're the one who decided to play games. You've been punishing me for trying to have a little independence." "Independence?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Is that what you call it? Acting like this house doesn't exist, like I don't exist. You didn't want independence. You wanted to live without consequences. Well, congratulations. You got what you wanted." She slammed her hand on the table, her frustration boiling over. "I wanted to feel like myself again. Do you know what it's like? To wake up one day and realize you've lost who you are, that you've been living someone else's life." "And what about me?" I said, my voice hard. "You think I don't make sacrifices? That I don't give up parts of myself for this marriage, for this life we built together? That's what being married is. It's compromise. It's work. But you don't want that. You want freedom without responsibility. Well, newsflash, that's not how this works." She stood up, pushing her chair back with a scrape. "I'm not saying I don't care about this marriage, but I can't go on like this, feeling suffocated, feeling like every decision has to go through you." I stood too, meeting her anger with my own. "And I can't go on feeling like everything I do, everything I've built, means nothing to you. You want freedom? Fine. But you don't get to have it at the expense of everything we've worked for." For a moment we just stood there, staring at each other across the table. The air between us crackled with tension, each of us daring the other to blink first. Then she did something I didn't expect. She sat back down, her shoulders slumping slightly. Her voice was quieter when she finally spoke. "So what now?" she asked. There was no defiance in her tone this time, just exhaustion. "Do we keep doing this? Keep tearing each other apart?" I sat down too, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I do know this can't go on. Something has to give." She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the table. For the first time in weeks, it felt like we were actually having a conversation instead of a battle. "I don't want to lose myself," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "And I don't want to lose this," I replied, gesturing to the space between us. "But we can't have both if we keep going like this." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't the oppressive silence of our Cold War. It was the silence of two people standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. I didn't have the answers, and neither did she. But one thing was clear: whatever came next, it wouldn't be the same as what came before. After that night in the kitchen, everything shifted. It wasn't a resolution. We didn't magically fix things with one conversation, but there was a sense of clarity, an unspoken understanding that the way we'd been living couldn't continue. It was time for a new set of rules, whether we liked it or not. The first few days were awkward. We tiptoed around each other, trying to figure out how to coexist without falling back into the patterns that had caused so much damage. For once, we weren't hurling accusations or playing games. Instead, we were testing the waters carefully, like two strangers learning to live together for the first time. The changes were subtle at first. I started paying attention to her cues, when she needed space, when she wanted to talk. I didn't hover. I didn't push. She, in turn, began to check in more often, a quick text if she was going to be late, a casual comment about her plans for the weekend. They were small gestures, but they felt monumental in the wake of everything that had happened. One Saturday morning, we found ourselves in the same room for more than a few minutes, a rarity lately. She was sitting on the couch with her laptop and I was flipping through the news on my phone. The silence was comfortable, almost peaceful, until she closed her laptop and looked at me. "Can we talk about this?" she asked, breaking the calm. "Not argue, just talk." I put my phone down and nodded. "Okay." She hesitated for a moment, then said, "I know I haven't handled things well. I thought if I just pushed hard enough, you'd give me the space I needed. But I see now that I was wrong." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "And I know I haven't exactly been fair either. I wanted to prove a point instead of trying to understand where you were coming from." We sat there, acknowledging our faults, something neither of us had been willing to do before. It was raw and uncomfortable, but it was also the first real step toward rebuilding whatever was left of us. From that conversation, we started to create what felt like a new version of our marriage. We agreed on boundaries, not as a way to control each other, but as a way to show respect. If she needed a night out with friends, she'd tell me ahead of time. If I needed time to myself, I'd make it clear, instead of shutting her out. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One of the hardest adjustments was redefining our roles in the house. I'd spent so long resenting her for what I saw as a lack of effort, but the truth was, I'd taken on too much without asking for help. Now we made a list of responsibilities and divided them equally. It was a practical solution, but it also felt like a symbolic one, a way of saying we're in this together. There were still moments of tension, of course. We were both stubborn, both used to fighting for control. But instead of escalating into another battle, we started catching ourselves, taking a step back. It wasn't easy, and it didn't always work, but it was progress. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "I think we lost sight of why we got married in the first place." I nodded, staring out at the horizon. "Maybe, but we're finding our way back." It wasn't a grand, sweeping moment of reconciliation. It wasn't romantic or poetic. It was real. Two people sitting together, acknowledging their flaws and trying to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like enough. The weeks that followed felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory. After everything we'd been through, the fights, the Cold War, the final confrontation, it was strange to navigate the quiet that had settled between us. Not an uneasy quiet, but the kind that comes after a storm, when the air is still heavy with the memory of chaos but calmer skies are beginning to show. We didn't rush into declaring victory or claiming we'd fixed everything. That would have been a lie. There were still cracks in our foundation, fragile spots that couldn't be ignored. But for the first time, we weren't ignoring them. We were talking, listening, and most importantly, trying. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, she broke the silence with a question I hadn't expected. "Do you ever think about why we ended up here?" I looked at her, unsure how to answer. "All the time," I said honestly, "and I still don't have the full answer." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think I got so caught up in trying to find myself that I forgot what I already had. And I think you got so focused on keeping everything together that you forgot I was struggling." That hit harder than I thought it would. She wasn't wrong. I'd been so fixated on maintaining control, on keeping things running smoothly, that I'd overlooked the signs of her unhappiness. But at the same time, her search for independence had felt like a rejection of everything we'd built together. "I think we both made mistakes," I said, my voice steady but soft. "And we both ended up hurting each other because of it." She reached for my hand, something she hadn't done in what felt like forever. "Do you think we can fix it?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Could we, after everything? Was it even possible to rebuild what we'd lost? I thought about all the times we'd clashed, the words we couldn't take back, the distance that had grown between us. But then I thought about the times we'd laughed, the moments we'd supported each other, the life we'd created together. "I think we already are," I said finally, little by little. From that point on, things didn't magically become easy, but they did feel more intentional. We started setting aside time for each other, not out of obligation, but because we wanted to. We had dinner together without distractions, talked about our days, and sometimes just sat in comfortable silence. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The biggest change, though, was how we approached conflict. Instead of letting things fester, we addressed them head-on. It wasn't always pretty. Old habits die hard. But it was a step in the right direction. When she felt overwhelmed or needed space, she told me instead of shutting me out. And when I felt frustrated or overburdened, I told her instead of lashing out. One night, as we were cleaning up after dinner, she looked at me and said, I think this is the first time in a long time that I felt like we're a team again." I smiled, setting the dish I was drying on the counter. "Me too." There's no neat ending to a story like this. Relationships aren't movies. They don't wrap up with a bow. But I can say this, we found a new rhythm, one that allowed us to be ourselves without losing each other in the process. It wasn't about one person winning or losing. It was about finding balance, about learning to respect each other's boundaries while still valuing what we had together. Looking back, I realized that the chaos we'd gone through had forced us to confront things we'd been avoiding for years. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty, but it was necessary. We came out of it scarred but stronger, with a better understanding of what it meant to truly share a life with someone. And now, as I sit here telling this story, I can say with certainty, we're still figuring it out, but we're doing it together. And that, for me, is enough. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon. Looking back on everything now, sitting alone in the quiet of our living room, with only the soft glow of a single lamp and the distant hum of the neighborhood settling into night, I realized just how close we came to losing it all. Not just the marriage, not just the house or the shared routines we'd built over the years, but the version of us that I once thought was unbreakable. There were nights, many nights, when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, convinced that the next morning would be the one where one of us finally said the words "I'm done" and meant them forever. The fear wasn't loud. It was a cold, steady ache right in the center of my chest, the kind that doesn't scream but slowly hollows you out. I was angry for a long time. Angry at her for dropping that declaration like a grenade and walking away from the wreckage without looking back. Angry at myself for the way I retaliated, for turning our home into a chessboard where every moved dish, every late night at the gym, every rearranged pillow was another calculated play. I told myself I was teaching her a lesson, showing her what her precious freedom really looked like when both of us claimed it at the same time. But the truth is uglier. I wanted her to hurt the same way I was hurting. I wanted her to feel the same disorientation, the same quiet panic of waking up and realizing the person you thought would always be there might not be. I wanted her to miss me the way I was already missing the woman I married, even while she was sitting 10 feet away. There were moments I hated who I became in that war. The man who could look at the woman he'd once promised to love through anything and feel only cold satisfaction when she finally noticed the pantry was no longer magically restocked with her favorite things. The man who could walk past a pile of her laundry without a flicker of the old reflex to just handle it, because that's what partners do. I told myself I was protecting my boundaries, reclaiming my autonomy, refusing to be taken for granted anymore. And some of that was true. But a bigger part was pure spite dressed up as principle, and I'm not proud of it. Yet somehow, in the middle of all that ugliness, something shifted. Not because either of us won. Not because one of us finally broke and surrendered. We didn't. We just ran out of ways to keep hurting each other without destroying the last fragile thread that still connected us. That night in the kitchen, when we both stood there shaking with anger and exhaustion, when she sat back down and asked, "So what now?" With that cracked, tired voice, something inside me finally exhaled. I saw her, really saw her for the first time in months, not the enemy I'd been battling, not the caricature of a selfish wife I'd built in my head to justify my own behavior, but the woman I fell in love with, drowning in her own way, just like I was. I was terrified to soften. Terrified that if I gave an inch, I'd wake up 6 months later back in the exact same cage I'd spent weeks clawing my way out of. But I was more terrified of the alternative, of becoming two people who once loved each other so fiercely that we now only knew how to wound. So I took the risk. I sat down. I listened. I admitted out loud that I'd been cruel too. And when she reached for my hand weeks later on that couch, when her fingers hesitated in the air for a second before settling into mine, I let them stay. That small, trembling contact felt more intimate than anything we'd done in months. Healing didn't feel heroic. It felt clumsy and fragile and terrifyingly slow. There were days I still woke up braced for a fight that never came, days when old reflexes kicked in and I caught myself cataloging her flaws like ammunition. There were nights she came home late and I had to talk myself down from the spiral of suspicion I'd lived in for so long. But little by little, the reflex to attack started to fade, replaced by a quieter, braver one to ask, to listen, to choose us even when it was hard. I'm not the same man I was before all of this. Some parts of me are harder now, boundaries I'll never let slip again. But some parts are softer too, more aware of how quickly love can turn into resentment if it isn't tended like a living thing. I understand now that marriage isn't a contract where one person keeps the other in line. It's a daily deliberate choice to build something together that's bigger than either of us alone. Some days we choose well, some days we still stumble. But we choose. If I could go back to the night she dropped her bombshell, I'd still be hurt. I'd still be angry. But I hope I'd have the wisdom to feel something else underneath it all. Fear, yes, but also compassion. Because beneath her defiance was a woman who felt invisible. And beneath my counterattack was a man who felt erased. We were both screaming "see me" in the only language we knew how to use at the time, destruction. We almost lost everything to prove we were free. Instead, we chose, slowly, painfully, deliberately, to become free together. And that, more than any dramatic reconciliation scene, is the real love story. Not the fight, not the Cold War, but the quiet, stubborn, imperfect mornings after when we keep choosing each other anyway. I don't know what the future holds. I know we'll fight again. I know old wounds will ache when it rains. But I also know this: the strongest thing two people can do isn't to never hurt each other. It's to decide, over and over, that the love is worth more than the damage. And every day we wake up and make that choice, we win. That's the part no one tells you about marriage. The real victory isn't the wedding day or the perfect years. It's the ordinary Tuesday evenings when you're both tired and flawed and still reach for each other's hand across the couch, knowing exactly how sharp the edges are and choosing to hold on anyway. That's where the miracle lives, not in never breaking, but in refusing to let go once we're both a little bit broken.